This is a small letter between Palestine and Israel, which was written on November 2, 1917 by the British Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, to a British Jewish community head, Lionel Walter Rothschild. It was written in this letter that the conflict between Israel and Palestine will continue for the next 100 years. The British government had no idea about this. Who is right and who is wrong between Israel and Palestine? What is the conflict between them? And what is the role of the British government in all this? Before World War I, there was no conflict in Palestine. The Muslim population was high, but the Jews and Christians lived happily with them. At that time, the entire area was under the control of the Ottoman Empire. If you look at this map, the Ottoman Empire was spread across many parts of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, which is called the Ottoman Empire. There were some Arab leaders who were fed up with the rule of the Ottoman Empire. They wanted to liberate themselves from here, and in order to achieve this goal, they hid from the enemies of the Ottoman Empire, the Britishers. The Britishers promised them that if they helped them in the war against the Ottoman Empire, they would be given a free country in return. The same promise was made by the Britishers to the Jews in Europe. Since the beginning, the Jews have been a nation who had no place in the world, that is, they had no country of their own. Wherever they lived, they were called a minority. The Jews in Europe were already facing a lot of difficulties. They were viewed with hatred, and in many places they were even killed. But why was this? There is a religious conflict behind it. For centuries, Christians believed that it was the Jews who caused the death of Jesus Christ. Just because of this main conflict, Christians in Europe did not tolerate Jews. The network of the first Jewish community in the world, as it is strong today, was already very strong. In Palestine, they called their movement to get a separate country, Zionism. This movement was started in 1896 by a Jewish political activist named Theodor Herzl. He wrote a book whose translation in English is Jewish State. In it, he wrote that if the Jews in Europe want to live a peaceful life, they will have to make their own country in Palestine. In the beginning, many Jews were against this concept. They used to say that why should we leave our country because of hatred against Jews? But as time passed, this movement changed into a political one. Jews from all over the world started moving towards Palestine. They were funded by their own community. They were also given money to set up businesses and factories there. The British government had also promised them, i.e., the European Jews, that they would give them a chance to make their own country in Palestine. Fast forward to 1917. World War I was going on, in which the Ottoman Empire was being completely defeated. On November 2, 1917, Britain's Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, wrote a letter to the head of a British Jewish community, Lionel Walter Rothschild. In this letter, it was written that the British government had decided that the Jews should come to Palestine and make their own country. Rothschild was assured that the British government would fully support him for this work. It was also written that this would not cause any harm to the Muslims who were already living here. A month after writing Balfour's letter, British soldiers came and took over Palestine and ended the 400-year rule of the Ottoman Empire. But the question is, what did the British government want in return for giving the Jews their own country? In fact, the British only wanted one thing, that after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, there should be a state here that could support them in the future, as their ally. That's why they promised the Jews a separate country, but in return, they also took a promise from the Jews that after making their separate country, they would not leave the British side. Earlier, the country that won the war would take over the next country and start ruling it, until it became independent itself. In World War I, Palestine was part of Britain. They tried their best to make a Jewish colony there, and succeeded in doing so. But the Arabs of Palestine, who were already living there, believed that Britain never asked them about their freedom. In 1919, Arthur Walford wrote a memorandum in which it was written that there is no need for Palestine to ask the Arabs who already lived there about their freedom. In the eyes of the Arabs of Palestine, the law made for the Jews of Britain was very soft. In Palestine, the process of the arrival of Jewish immigrants from all over the world began. There, they made their own small army with the help of their schools, factories, and Britishers, which is called Haganah. The Arabs of Palestine had no other option but to think that the Britishers were not doing anything for our freedom, but were giving our land to others. They endured for a few years, but in 1939, the Arabs of Palestine began to raise their voice. But there was only one reason to raise their voice in front of the Britishers: treachery. The Arabs of Palestine were arrested for doing this, some leaders were expelled from Palestine and some were hanged. But the Arabs of Palestine did not end their strike. On this, the British government created an appeal commission to solve the matter. This commission came up with the solution of unrest in Palestine, that Palestine should be divided into two parts. The Arabs of Palestine did not accept this solution either. Because in reality, there was unrest on the matter of why Palestine is being divided. By 1939, their strike continued until the white paper of the British government was released. In this white paper, the British government published a policy keeping in mind the last 20 years of the situation in Palestine. In this policy, first of all, the Peel Commission was rejected, which ended the strike of the Arabs. In addition, new Jewish immigrants were admitted to Palestine. And the Jews who were already in Palestine were also stopped from buying the land of the Arabs. In addition, it was decided that in the next 10 years, Palestine should be made an independent state, and that it would also be the home country of the Jewish people. For Zionists, this white paper was no less than a deception. This white paper created a conflict between Jews and Britishers for the first time. They refused to accept the white paper and started attacks on the British government throughout Palestine, in which many local Palestinians were killed. These attacks continued for several months, but then something even bigger happened, which caught everyone's attention. In 1939, World War II started. Where this war took the lives of 6 crore people all over the world, there, Hitler, in his death camps, brutally killed 60 lakh European Jews. This incident is called the Holocaust. Between 1941 and 1945, Hitler killed 66% of the Jews living in Europe. The remaining Jews had no option but to go to Palestine. Because it was a very holy place for them, and the Jewish community was already there. Despite the immigration limit imposed by the British, they started migrating to Palestine. But the situation in Palestine was not good. There, Zionists were still fighting against the British against the white paper. After World War II, the British were all tired, and they did not have the courage to fight against Zionists in Palestine. Therefore, in 1947, they decided to leave. And in Palestine, they put their plan to the United Nations, to find a solution to this problem. At that time, there were 630,000 Jews in Palestine, while there were 143,000 Christians and 11,81,000 Muslims. These figures were given by an Italian Jewish demographer, Sergio Tella. At that time, the Muslim population was clearly different from the Jews. But the United Nations proposed to give 55% of the land to the Jews. The United Nations General Assembly received 72% of the votes, and it was finalized that Palestine would get 55% of the land to the Jews. The United Nations has never explained how only 30% of the land was given to the Jews. At that time, India was also present in the UN Assembly, and India also voted against this decision. At that time, PM Jawaharlal Nehru raised a lot of voices against the UN decision, and said that the UN's Indian ambassador had been bribed by Zionists to vote for him. Anyway, this UN resolution was rejected by all Arab countries, and now Zionists and Palestinians live in Palestine. But obviously, the Jews had a very strong military, so the Palestinians could not confront them. On the 14th, 1948, David Ben-Gurion officially announced the establishment of the State of Israel. He had already become the first Prime Minister of Israel. In 1948, all the neighboring Arab countries decided to attack Israel. Because they had already voted against it in the US. And in their eyes, this was a new way for the British to take over our country. This was the first Arab-Israel war, in which 5 Arab countries attacked a small Israel, which was only a few months old. But Israel had the support of the Western countries. And in fact, they had a very strong military. Therefore, Israel alone defeated 5 Arab countries. After the end of the war, Israel took over the areas chosen by the UN for Palestine. The West Bank was taken over by Jordan and under the control of the Gaza Strip. In 1967, another Arab-Israel war took place, in which Israel not only took over the West Bank, but also the entire Sinai Peninsula of Gaza Strip and Egypt. In the midst of all this, the people of Palestine wanted to make their own country. For this purpose, they created their own organization, which is called the PLO, that is, the Palestine Liberation Organization. In the beginning, they took up arms and forcibly tried to make their own country. To raise their voice, the PLO hijacked many planes and ships. For this reason, the PLO was declared a terrorist organization by the United States and Israel. But many countries did not call the PLO a terrorist organization. They considered them only revolutionists who wanted to make their own country. In 1974, the PLO is officially recognized by the United Nations. In this way, it is a representative of the Palestinian people. After that, in 1979, peace talks between Egypt and Israel take place by chance. And Egypt becomes the first Arab country to officially recognize Israel. On this, Israel returns Egypt to its Sinai Peninsula. But after 2 years, the Egyptian prime minister was killed by extremist groups. On this occasion, how did they make peace with Israel? For so long, instead of Israeli occupation on the West Bank, many Jews started making their homes there. But the international community objected to this, because it was actually against the partition plan of the United Nations in 1947. The West Bank area was originally reserved for Palestine. But Israel also occupied it and began to trap its people there. In 1992, peace talks take place again between Israel and the PLO. The leader of the PLO, Yasser Arafat, also recognizes Israel. Israeli PM Yitzhak Rabin also recognizes the PLO and complains that the PLO is not a terrorist organization. During this time, the PLO also splits. Another wing of the PLO, which does not want any kind of compromise with Israel, becomes what we know today as Hamas. On the other hand, Israel's extremist group also goes against its PM and says that no compromise should be made with Palestine. But this does not make a difference to peace talks. The PLO and Israel meet for the first time and try to solve this issue. But the problem was that many Israelis had already made their homes in the West Bank. That too, because of the Israeli government. So the solution was to divide the West Bank into 3 parts. A, B and C. In this area, A, only Palestine will be under the control of the PLO. The area B will be under the control of both. The area C will also be under the control of both. And the area will be under Israel's control. In 1947, the partition plan of the United Nations was not visible from far away. Palestine can only find a few pieces in the West Bank, where it can run its own government. The non-PLO also accepted this. But then, in 1995, something happened that shattered all peace talks. The Jewish extremist group killed its own prime minister. At no cost, they did not want any Palestinians to settle near the West Bank. In 1996, the first elections of Palestine take place and the first government of Palestine is formed. But Hamas, which is the militant wing of Palestine, is not happy with this and byvotes the elections. Not only that, but it also carries out many suicide bombs in Israel, which increases the hatred between the Israelis and the Palestinians to a great extent. After this incident, the clashes between the two continue. To avoid this, Israel built a concrete wall around its settlements in the West Bank. This made it even more difficult for the Palestinians to live. Then, in 2006, elections are held again in Palestine and this time Hamas wins. As a result, a civil war breaks out between the PLO party Fatah and Hamas, and Palestine is divided into 2 parts. Today, Hamas holds Gaza Strip and the PLO, i.e. Fatah's government, is in small pieces in the West Bank. Most of the clashes between Israel and Hamas are in which rockets are fired at Israel from this Gaza Strip. For this reason, Israel has built a very large fence around the Gaza Strip. Today, every other year, the war between Hamas and Israel intensifies again. This happened last time in 2021, and now on October 7, 2023, Hamas has fired more than 5,000 rockets at Israel. This was the conflict between Israel and Palestine, which has changed faces for the past 100 years and has made its presence felt to this day. I have tried to cover this topic very carefully without targeting any religion, only through facts and figures. Do let me know your views on this topic in